Hi, and thank you for coming. We are literally in my kitchen. My name is Robert Waldinger. I'm a psychiatrist at Massachusetts General Hospital, and I am the director of the Harvard Study of Adult Development. It's, as far as we know, the longest in-depth study of human life that's ever been done. We have followed the same people from the time they were teenagers all the way into old age. We started in the 1930s and have followed the same people all the way along. A few people are still alive and in their 90s. And there are a whole set of children who we've also studied. These children are now middle-aged. And our study asks probably the biggest question that there is, which is, what keeps us happy and healthy as we go through our lives? And the study gave us one of the most surprising answers that I've found, which is that among all the things that predict who's going to be happy and healthy through their life, our relationships with each other is one of the strongest predictors. That having warmer, closer relationships with other people not just keeps us happier, but keeps our brains sharper, helps us to live longer. And what we learned from this research and from many other research projects now is that our relationships are our most precious resource. So here we are in this time of physical distancing where we need to be physically separate from each other. How do we hold on to our relationships and hopefully even strengthen them? So what I'd like to host is a set of kitchen table chats. We're in my kitchen because I find that my kitchen is one of the places where I have some of my most important conversations. And like a kitchen table where we sit around with family and friends, we'd like this to be a safe space for people to be able to share their concerns about relationships, to share their worries, to share what's working, what's going well. And what I see now is that we have people from all over, not just from the United States, but from Spain, from Argentina. It's pretty wonderful that we get to connect with each other in this way. Now, I said I'd like it to be a safe space, and that's important, meaning there is no question that's too simple. There's no question that's wrong. Nobody gets to be wrong. We leave all of our judgments at the door. This is a place to just talk about what's happening in our lives and to do what we can to help each other through this crisis. So one of the things you can do is know that this is being recorded. And so you can also go to this YouTube channel and see the recording again if you need to, or share it with somebody. You can also subscribe to this channel to get updates. You can connect on Twitter, because I would love to hear what people are thinking about. It's at Robert Waldinger, all one word. If you're tweeting about it, you can use the hashtag Robert Waldinger chat, or you can visit our foundation website. It's www.lifespanresearch.org, where we'll keep putting up more information to try to help each other. You know, here we are with so much gloomy news and so many changes we have to make in our lives, so much caution we have to take. And we're all looking for some kind of relief from this worry and some reminder of what's good in life, what remains good in the face of all this. So I thought I would start with a piece of that. I thought I would start by reading the beginning of a poem by a Franciscan monk who lives in Ireland. His name is Richard Hendrick. Sometimes he's known as Brother Richard. Let me read you the beginning of the poem. It's called Lockdown. He writes, yes, there's fear. Yes, there's isolation. Yes, there's panic buying. Yes, there's sickness. Yes, there's even death. But they say that in Wuhan, after so many years of noise, you can hear the birds again. They say that after just a few weeks of quiet, that the sky is no longer thick with fumes, but blue and gray and clear. They say that in the streets of Assisi, people are singing to each other across the empty squares, keeping their windows open so that those who are alone may hear the sounds of family around them. All over the world, people are slowing down and reflecting. All over the world, people are looking at their neighbors in a new way. All over the world, people are waking up to a new reality, to how big we really are, to how little control we really have, to what really matters, to love. I love this poem because it looks at those unexpected silver linings that are there for us when we can pay attention to them. And the poem reminds us that this is a chance to show each other our best selves, to set some intentions for ourselves, for how we want to be, for how we want to show up for each other during this crisis. Because if you think about it, when we think back about our lives, it's the unusual times, including crisis times, that we remember. And we remember who was kind to us, who was there for us. I say this because we're all having to make difficult choices right now. I'm having to make choices about when to stay separate from members of my family and when it's okay for us to be close and in what ways. I have a colleague who's a physician in her 70s who is torn between going to take care of desperately ill patients and staying at home to take care of her demented husband, for whom she is the only caregiver. One of my Zen students is struggling because his wife just lost her job, so he has to work many extra hours. Meanwhile, their kids are home from school. They need homeschooling. They need childcare. They need attention. And of course, big money worries for this family, as for so many families right now. One of the things we've done is to put up a couple of questions that we'd love for you to answer, just to get a sense of what people's biggest concerns are right now. And so if you move your cursor up to the eye on the top right of your screen, if you hover over that little eye, you'll see some questions. And if you'd be willing to answer them, we can let each other know what's on our minds. So in this kitchen table chat, I thought I would say a few words about a particular topic as I am now, and then offer us all a chance to share our big questions, to share what's working for us, what our best practices are, some of the new things we're figuring out in this unusual time. Of course, none of us has the same situation. Some of us live alone. Some of us live surrounded by people, roommates, family members. Some of us are caring for ill relatives or friends. Right now, what we want to do is remind ourselves of what our connections with each other can do for us, both because Many of us are thinking about how we can offer help to other people. And many of us are thinking about how do we get the help that we need? Because we all do need help in various ways. So let me just kind of remind us of the kinds of help we're thinking about. And if you have things you're doing that are working right now, please send them in through the chat function. First of all, one of the basic ways we support each other is through physical support, by helping people with physical activities that they can't do for themselves. So for example, there is a man in my neighborhood who's out on his bike, stopping in at the pharmacy every morning, picking up a whole lot of prescriptions and delivering them to people who are shut-ins, to people who can't get out, who are too frightened to go out of their homes, but who need their medications. We give each other social support by just being together, by just reminding each other of what it's like to connect, to express some warmth, to tell a joke. I know of a running club in my community where everybody is now getting together virtually. They set their intention for their run and how long they're going to run. Then they all go outside and run separately. They come back at a certain time online and they tell stories about their run and they tell jokes. People are having virtual coffee hours, virtual book clubs, where people are reminded of how much they love to read and share a book together. Virtual cocktail hours, people are having a beer together. My wife and I have started having cocktail hours with friends, and it's such a pleasure to reestablish those connections. Of course, this leads us into the emotional support that we give each other through our relationships. And all of us need emotional support, especially now. I mean, think about grandparents being able to connect with grandchildren over video chat. And not just so that the grandparents can see those adorable young faces, but so that grandchildren can ask their grandparents things like, what was it like when you went through a crisis when you were young? And how did you come through it? How do you get through hard times? We check in, particularly with people who live alone, with people who are in some way isolated. And in addition to emotional support, we give each other spiritual support, giving each other a spiritual perspective on what life is about, on what's important, so that many religious groups and spiritual groups are meeting online. Mosques, synagogues, churches, all getting together. My Zen group is meeting as usual every Monday night with meditation and chanting and talks and interviews with teachers. There's a Jewish group that's already planning a virtual Passover Seder to be conducted in a couple of weeks. All of this helps remind us of the bigger picture of being alive in this world. Of course, another way we support each other is by giving each other information and perspective. We share really useful information, the latest facts from the CDC, the latest recommendations for how to stay safe. And of course, what we want is to be sure we tune into reliable sources. There's a great deal out there that is not reliable, so checking the sources carefully is important. And finally, we help each other financially. It might mean helping someone pay their rent in a time of crisis. It might mean just supporting your local takeout restaurant so that they stay in business when this crisis is over. Now, we're talking about how we support each other in our relationships, but it's also important to use resources when we are emotionally distressed. So this is a hard time, and many of us have mental health needs. Some of us are more depressed, are more anxious. Some of us are struggling with addiction, with eating problems. We will try to post on our website and try to send you a link to some very trusted resources for mental health that all of us should use right now. And anyone in your life who is in distress should use these resources to try to ease the burden of mental and emotional distress right now. So where do we begin with our chat? Well, we've begun, but what I thought I would do is share just a few basic takeaways, because this is such an important time. It's an important time to remember what's most vital in our relationships. So even though these are basic, and even though you all know this, sometimes it's helpful for us to remind each other of the most important things about relationships to keep in mind. So first of all, in our dealings with each other, make kindness your default setting. We are all under so much extra stress now. And what that means is that we need to cut each other more slack than usual. Be kind. And when someone gets irritable with you, answer that irritability with a kind response, or at least a neutral response, rather than fueling the flames. Similarly, cut yourself slack. Be kinder to yourself. When you've decided that you've done something terrible or that you're all wrong today, just remember that this is a time of stress. Take some time out. Do some things to restore your own emotional equilibrium. Remembering how much stress we are under can really help ease some of the pressure in our relationships. Remember that life is really short, and remember what's important. How are you going to want to look back on this crisis and on how you and your loved ones were with each other? Another thing to remember is that it's going to take time to develop some new daily routines. Many of us are seeing people all day, every day, who we're used to not seeing for much of the day. We all go our separate ways to work, to school. Suddenly we're all together, sometimes in very small spaces. Allow new routines to develop and help out. Think in creative ways about when to be together and when we need to leave each other alone. Dream up new ways to connect with people in your life. Dream up ways to be outside with people at a good, careful social distance, but taking walks with people you haven't ever taken a walk with before. And also try moving some of your activities that you usually did in person into a video platform or on the phone. Just as I was talking about book groups or religious services, think of other things you've done. Playing games, think of ways to move it into the virtual world. Make up new traditions. I've heard of some middle school friends, people who are now, in their 50s, who haven't seen each other since they were in the 7th grade, who have come together and formed a little group, a little video chat that regularly checks in, and they're having a wonderful time reconnecting. One rule of thumb is if the thought crosses your mind to reach out to somebody, do it. Don't second guess yourself right now. That if you have an impulse to connect, make the connection. People will be so grateful. And remember that even the people who you think ought to be just fine because they're surrounded by others, those people may not be fine. Those people may be lonely, even surrounded by others. So check in with people, even the people who you think are okay. Especially check in with people who you know are taking care of others, taking care of relatives, friends, or whose work it is to take care of others. I have a friend who's in his 80s who proudly reports that he's checking in every day on his older friends. And by that he means his friends who are in their 90s. He's happy, they're happy. So now, let's have a bit of conversation in the way that we can here. I'd be grateful if you would text me two sorts of things. One is some questions you're having right now in your relationships that we might be able to talk about a little bit. And also text ideas about how you're doing things to strengthen your relationships. Ideas about what's working right now in your family, with your friends. And if there's anything that you text in that I don't get to hear, I'll try to answer it. For example, on Twitter. If you're just joining us, we're talking about our relationships, about how to strengthen them, about what's working. So please join in the conversation. All right, so let me see. There's a question here from Hardik. Hardik writes, recently there have been virtual museums opening up to help people explore visual art. I wonder if your research has come across evidence of the impact of studying visual art and talking about it with others, that is, on one's health in times of social distancing. Well, Hardik, it's a really creative idea. We have not studied that in our research. I don't know of any research that has looked at that. But what I will say is that looking at art together can be a powerful emotional experience. And we know that having emotional experiences together is very restorative. It bonds people together. So music together, playing music, listening to music. And just as you suggest, perhaps looking at art, discussing a book you've read, discussing a poem. So no, we haven't studied that in our research project, but it sounds like a great idea. And I would not at all be surprised if talking about and studying art together is one way that people can stay healthier by strengthening their relationships. All right, another question is, people are talking about reading to kids. Someone is FaceTiming with her best friend. Somebody else, somebody's hanging Christmas lights. So these are some ideas for what's working. Somebody said, my nieces are FaceTiming. Somebody else is having virtual cocktail hours. I'll just put all this out there for us to consider and see what resonates with you or what sparks you to want to organize something. All right, a question from Jonathan. He asks, what about the large portion of the population that can't afford technology? That is a really important question, because here we are on technology. What about the people who don't have access? I know that some school systems are having difficulty trying to make sure that every child who's at home has access to technology so that they can connect with their teachers and so that teachers can continue to teach. I think what we do if we know people who don't have access to technology is, first of all, see if we can share. I mean, many of us have more than one screen, and even if we just have one screen, reach out to a neighbor, to a friend, to a relative, and see if they want to, you come and use your screen, borrow your screen. I guess they can't come and sit close to you, but they can borrow your screen, do a lot of good cleaning so that we practice using our technology hygienically, because that's an issue. But there may still be ways to share that technology with people who don't have access. I know that some communities are giving out. He wants to know any creative suggestions for meaningful connections. Well, text things in if you have suggestions. I've mentioned a few. Let me think of some of the other things I've learned about. I know, for example, there are virtual doctor's visits and nurses' visits. So don't assume that you can't talk with your doctor if you need to. In fact, one bit of advice has been to get in touch with your doctor or your healthcare provider. For example, rather than going to an emergency room or going to a hospital, if you're sick but you are not short of breath and you're pretty sure that you are not severely ill, stay home and see about connecting virtually, even though you may never have connected with a healthcare provider before. This can also happen with therapists. Here's a counselor texting in. Dave asks, I'm a counselor for a crisis text line. We're seeing many people reaching out who are stuck in toxic, dysfunctional homes. What can we do for people like this who can't really remove themselves? That is a really important question. So we know that sometimes relationships are difficult, they can be abusive. And one of the first things we try to do is to separate people who are harming each other in any way. Certainly, if people are physically harming each other, people need to be separated. If you are afraid of someone in your home, you can reach out for help. You can call 911. There are community resources that you can reach out to get help, even if it means taking you away or removing the person who is causing you fear. Because unfortunately, violence in relationships is a reality, and it's more likely to occur when we're all under more stress. So very important. In addition, what Dave may be talking about are families where people don't get along. Maybe a couple don't get along. They're fighting and the children are upset. And now the children are home all day long and needing to listen to this. So the message needs to be, everybody needs to cut each other slack. Everybody needs to put arguments on hold. Absolutely. Until such time as there's a way to get more space and ideally a way to get help. There's good counseling to be had for difficult relationships, but while we're all cooped up right now, the best thing is to give each other a lot of room when you can. Go take a walk when you need to. Wait for things to cool off. Remember, even the most intense emotion doesn't last. It waxes and then it wanes again. Bettina asks, I'm living with my sister and my boyfriend, and I'm having trouble connecting with them both separately. I can feel excluded by them. Any advice? Yeah, that's a really common scenario because often we're in settings where not everybody is equally close. So what do you do when you're feeling left out? Well, one thought, Bettina, is that if you can talk about it with your sister and your sister's boyfriend, see if they're willing to have that conversation where you say, I'm feeling kind of left out. And if you can be specific about when you feel left out or when you'd like to be included, that would be helpful because specifics can help other people engage with you in solving a problem. If you still feel left out, then work on other connections. Even if you can't leave and can't meet other people in person, work on connecting with people on a video platform, on social media. Do the best you can to build and strengthen other relationships. They are not the only two people in the world, even though they're the only two people right around you at this moment. It looks like there are a couple more questions coming in. Also, again, please let us know if there are things that have worked. All right. One from Dana, who wants to know, any thoughts on keeping team shifting to telework motivated? I say teams who are shifting to telework, how do you keep them motivated? It's harder for some people than others, of course. That's a really good question. I know, for example, that my son works for a company where they're all working from home, but the company has sent out a notice saying, let's declare that from 12 noon to 2 p.m. every weekday that you're working, that's your personal time. You go away and do whatever you want to do for yourself, for your family, with friends. Take that time. So this company is giving extra time to set aside where they don't schedule meetings and they ask people to take care of themselves. Some companies are offering extra check-ins. Maybe you organize a team happy hour when there isn't a work activity happening. It's not a meeting. It's a 6 p.m. happy hour if people can do that. That there need to be some ways. The other thing we can do, if it's a safe enough space, is to share our stories. So, for example, when we get together with another couple on video chat, we talk about what's happening. We talk about what's happening with our relatives. We talk about what we're worried about. We check out some of the rumors we've been hearing. Teams can do this too. Often, it's so much easier to relate to someone if you know that they have a child who's really unhappy being separated from her teenage friends, or if they have a toddler who needs to watch the same Disney movie over and over again and the parents are going crazy. All of these personal anecdotes and stories can help bind us together. And if there are times to do that after our usual work activities, that can help teams feel more connected with each other as people. And we know that when teams feel more connected with each other as people, they do better work. This is a question from Dario. What is your view on the potential changes for society after this crisis? Whoa, that's a big question. And needless to say, I don't consider myself an expert on that, but I can tell you some of my impressions. I think we're learning about some of the things that are not essential. I think we may be learning about some of the meetings and activities that are less essential and some of the activities that are, pardon me, really vital to our well-being. And so I think we may start adding some things, subtracting others when we think about how we spend our time. It may be that we don't need to commute as long or as often as we do, that much of our work is happening now from home. That has upsides in that it might save us a lot of hours on public transportation or in the car, but it also might isolate us more. So I think we're going to learn about new ways of interacting with each other because of this crisis, and they're going to have good side effects and they're going to have some not so good side effects that we're going to have to find ways to counter. This is a question from the Gen Well Project. I don't know that project, but thanks for texting something in. The question is, how do we entrench the awareness of the need for human connection that we're all feeling right now after the crisis is over and we get back to the new normal? This is so important. I go out and take a walk in my neighborhood, and some people are much more eager to say hello than they used to be. And how great is that? Because we didn't used to regularly say hello to each other. We'd just all be listening to our music and getting our aerobic exercise and taking our walks. So, Gen Well Project, I don't know the answer to that, but I think part of it will happen through the memories we have of greater connection with each other. So that if we have experiences that energize us, that calm us down, that make us feel better about our lives. And those experiences are through these connections. My hope is that we will say, we need more of this. We need to institutionalize these things. And particularly that some of the disconnection that our culture has been feeling through culture wars, that will subside. Because if you think about it, many of the things that we get all revved up about with each other don't mean anything compared to the life and death stakes of something like this crisis, this pandemic. Carlotta wants to know, child abuse and neglect is on the rise, and that's absolutely true. How can we help these children? These are the invisible victims in the lockdown. Ooh, that's really important, because child abuse at home is often invisible anyway, but at least much of the time children are reporting to school every day, where bruises can be noticed. A really sad child, a distracted child can be talked to and checked in with. What happens now when children are at home? And what I would say is that we all need to pay more careful attention to each other, pay more careful attention to the children we catch glimpses on our video chats, to the children we get glimpses of in the neighborhood who are playing. And if we are worried, to check in with families, to support overly stressed parents who may be acting in hurtful ways toward their children because they're at their wits' end. Luis from Mexico wants to know, how can we prevent the telepresence burnout from so many Zoom meetings? Oh, Luis, that is such an important question. I think many of us are finding that we are racing from one meeting to another, now racing meetings, shifting in our chair and opening one new video platform after another. But yes, I think one of the things I'm having to learn is that we need our breaks. So don't allow yourself to schedule a meeting back to back if you can help it. If you are working remotely with a team of people, talk with your team. Ask your team to allow for breaks. Some people are calling them bio breaks, where we go and use the bathroom, where we get a drink, where we get some food, but also just time to stretch, to walk around the block. Really important. I think this is one of those aspects of self-care that can fall by the wayside because we want to respond to each other, right? Including to the needs of our virtual colleagues, to our workmates. But we need to remember to take care of each other. That also means checking in and saying, are you having too many meetings today? And do we need to all take a break now? Again, one reminder, never be afraid to end a meeting early. When was the last time someone gave you the gift of ending a meeting early rather than just extending it because the time was there? So try to give each other breaks and make sure you build breaks in for yourself. Well, if there are any more questions, I see another one. Celtic Red asks, oh, there's a lot of snitching on neighbors and petty complaints on social media. Like we are the villagers in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. How can we keep from turning on each other? Ooh, really important. One of the things that has happened in times of other pandemics is that people do turn on their neighbors. We have to remember that those nasty impulses are going to come up. We all have them within us. You know, I have the impulse to say something snarky about someone else, to post something mean online. I have the impulse, but whenever I can, I don't act on it Don't be ashamed that you have the impulses. Just do your best to press the pause button and not act on those impulses. Do not snitch on your neighbor. Remember that all of us are going through such a hard time. There's a quote that I love that might be useful to bring out here. There was a Scottish clergyman who once told his congregation, "Be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a great battle." And if we think about it, right now, each of us is fighting a great battle. So when you look at your neighbor and you find yourself being judgmental, remember, we are all doing the best we can. Eliana asks a question. She writes, as a teacher, some of our students say that they're struggling to continue doing their coursework at times like this. Any tips or help to reassure them? Well, first of all, it's really helpful to reassure kids that what they're experiencing is normal. One of the best things we can do, it sounds so simple, is to reassure each other about the normalcy of what's happening. So kids may be sitting there saying, why can't I concentrate on this book or on this assignment that I'm supposed to be doing? Well, it's much harder to do that when you're sitting at home and there are all these distractions you're not used to. When you're not at school, when you're not sitting at your desk. So remind your students that that's okay, that that's to be expected, and then just help them figure out what might be right for them. Do they have a place that they could go that's super quiet, or a place they go where they can get work done more easily than any other? And allow each of your students to choose what works, to find what works for them, to choose the places and the settings, even the music that works for them if listening to music does. But I think each child can be supported in finding their own space in which to try to get some work done. Robin D has a question. What about connecting with oneself? This seems an overlooked opportunity with so much emphasis on connecting with others. Absolutely, Robin. I mean, I practice Zen meditation, and so connecting with myself is a big part of my daily routine. Now, you don't have to meditate, of course, to connect with yourself. Think about something you do that you love, that calms you. It could be listening to a certain song. It could be walking down a certain block. It could be staring at a tree. For me, sometimes it is literally just sitting outside, staring at a tree, watching birds come and go on the branches of the tree. So connecting with yourself is absolutely something you want to do, particularly when you're under stress. Robin, thank you for bringing that in. Lucia, how can we help children who feel this quarantine is taking too long? Yes, because think about it, if we as adults feel that it's taking too long, what must it be like for kids? What must it be like for a 5-year-old who's used to running around with their friends at school, or a teenager who's just spreading their wings and wanting to be with friends more than anything? And now we're telling them they can't do that? So I think what we do is we empathize. We don't tell them stop complaining. We say, yeah, this is really hard. This is hard for me. Let's figure out ways to deal with it. We got to deal with it. We're in this together. We can't make it go shorter than it is. We can't shorten the time, but we can help each other. And you and your friends can help each other figure out ways to make the time go by. Here's a question from Auntie BK. She asks, I'm missing the physical touch. I'm missing the connection of a hug. Any suggestions? Wow. Yes. me too. I have a son who lives in New York, and I really wish I could hug him right now. And many of us who live alone don't get to touch anyone. That is really hard because physical touch, we know, literally calms the body down. So, as far as your question is concerned, there's no substitute for physical touch, but sometimes, obviously, if you have an animal, that can really help. If you have a pet, I mean, dogs and cats are wonderful for this. If you're allowed to take a walk, and if there are dogs around and you can keep your distance from people but pet a dog, perhaps that's allowed. I'm not sure about the hygiene of that. I'll leave that to my infectious disease physician colleagues to talk about that. But touch is really important. And if you can't touch, do this kind of connecting virtually with other people. It's not the same as touch, but it can go some of the distance. A question from Marin. How can we protect ourselves, our friends, and our communities against toxic disinformation? Well, one of the things we need to do is check out the sources of information. So I would say that if you want good sources of information about the pandemic, about the virus, go to information put out by hospitals. Go to information put out by the CDC. Don't go to pundits who might be a brilliant financial advisor, but really don't know anything about infectious disease. Many people are out there telling you about things that they are not expert in. And one of the things I will do my best to do is tell you when I am not an expert, when I'm not the person to be asked here. So I would say that be very careful about where you're getting your information and go to the most reliable sources you can. How can we deal with a sense of grief and loss and fear at a time when we're not always happy with what leaders are saying or how they're conducting their leadership activities? And I must say that what we want to look to are the people who inspire us to be our best selves. Anybody who asks you to hate other people, to be suspicious of other people, that is a person to stay away from, not to listen to. Anybody who reminds you of what's good in ourselves and in other people, that is the person to pay some attention to. That when we hear those voices that want to divide us, it gets us deeper and deeper into anger and fear and frustration. We don't have to listen to those voices. All right, I think now I am going to bring this to a close. But before we do, let me ask if you would do one thing, which is in the last question we've asked you. So if you go up to that little eye at the top of your screen and you put your cursor on it and you see the questions, the last question is, what action could you see yourself committing to this week to strengthen some relationship? It could be a tiny action. It doesn't have to be anything big, but what could you do just to set an intention for something to do, whether it's right now or in the next day or in the next week? So answer in that poll that we're taking, and we'll try to let you know what people say, and also feel free to text it in, but just set yourself an intention for doing something this week to strengthen a relationship. And so now, as we close, what I'd like to do is finish with the last portion of Brother Richard Hendricks' poem, that poem, Lockdown. This is the final portion of the poem. He writes, "Wake to the choices you make as to how to live now. Today, breathe. Listen behind the factory noises of your panic. The birds are singing again. The sky is clearing. Spring is coming, and we are always encompassed by love. Open the windows of your soul, and though you may not be able to touch across the empty square, sing. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for helping us remind each other that we're not alone, that we're connected, that we can use our collective wisdom to help in this time of crisis. And remember that a recording of this session will be on this YouTube channel. You can subscribe to the channel, connect on Twitter if you want to, at Robert Waldinger. I'll post some of these ideas at www.lifespanresearch.org. And I'll be here again next Tuesday. We'll send out notices about it again. So please come again. And until then, stay safe. Thank you very much for coming.